The obvious problem with General John Kelly going on the record and saying, yes, I heard Trump say, quote, I need the kind of generals that Hitler had, is that a huge number of his supporters will applaud this. And the obvious problem with Jeffrey Goldberg of the Atlantic quoting those who were there and notes taken at the meeting as Trump was told the cost of the funeral he had offered to pay for a murdered U.S. soldier named Vanessa Guillen, and Trump screamed, quote, it doesn't cost $60,000 to bury an effing Mexican, don't pay it, is that even more of Trump's supporters will applaud that. Because the real, disgusting, nauseating truth behind the revelations in the Goldberg Atlantic piece is that it touches the third and fourth rails of Donald Trump's America. Many of his people believe whoever is in charge should be supported by, and in fact kept in power by, the kind of generals Hitler had. The anti-Semites in the Trump cult love it, obviously, and the ones who aren't anti-Semites, just authoritarians, love it, obviously, even if they're queasy about the anti-Semitism, and the ones who aren't anti-Semites and aren't authoritarians, but have always just secretly believed the word democracy was merely another brand name or flavor of government. They love it because it posits a kind of America, not just where might makes right, but where only might makes right, and where only whites have might. And if there is anybody missing from the Trump coalition of evil, anybody who isn't inspired by, I need the kind of generals that Hitler had, they are certainly covered by, it doesn't cost $60,000 to bury an effing Mexican. Because if violence and militarism are the Trumpian third rail, racism and specifically anti-Hispanic racism are the Trumpian fourth rail. The rest of us have danced around this reality because the alternative is to recognize just how much larger it is than we want to believe in our worst moments, just how much racism still seeps into the brains not just of the Trumpists, but of some of the moderates we know, and even some of the liberals we know. But since Trump came down that escalator so excited by what he was about to say, denigrating immigrants and Mexicans, that he almost bothered to move and walk rather than just stand there in gelatinous pride and ride down the escalator. Since that moment, this has not been about undocumented immigration or even illegal aliens. It's been entirely about Hispanics. In exactly the same way, the first 200 years of our history was at root entirely about African Americans. And the reason we have never solved this Hispanic immigration crisis, the reason the Republicans have made sure for 40 goddamned years that there always has been an immigration crisis and always will be an immigration crisis, was to give their people somebody to hate. Only Trump, after a life in which he inexplicably was not killed by some kid at NEMA, the New York Military Academy, who snapped after being dangled out a window by Trump one time too many, or he wasn't killed by somebody else's husband, or he wasn't killed by drugs or disco or whatever in the 70s. After a life in which he started by believing he was immortal and untouchable and that there were no consequences, but he got worse from there, only Trump would have been stupid enough to tear up this exquisite stitching of the quilt of excuses for why the immigration crisis wasn't actually an immigration crisis, but just an excuse to let the pasty white folks hate the brown people and blame them and abuse them, and all the while make sure that there never really was any significant change to the importation of migrant labor from Mexico and Latin America. Hell, let's drop the euphemisms. There never really was any significant change to the importation of virtual slave labor from Mexico and Latin America and Puerto Rico, for that matter, because they actually tried that once. In the state of Georgia, 13 years ago, they promised roundups. They did some deportations, and guess what? All the people in this country, in Georgia, without documentation, got the hell out of Georgia before the deadline and went and worked the farms in other states. And something like $300 million worth of Georgia crops rotted in the fields. Because guess who would not harvest it? The fat, stupid white people in Georgia who had kicked out all the immigrants. The new problem, of course, the new twist in this, the new reason his supporters will cheer Trump insulting this poor woman, Private Vanessa Guillen, murdered at her army base, and cheer his use of the phrase, it doesn't cost $60,000 to bury an effing Mexican, and the follow-up, don't pay it, can you believe it, effing people trying to rip me off, is that Trump, of course, is insane. Somewhere along the line, he forgot that the only way you can keep the machine going, harvest the crops, keep the restaurant open, not pay the fry cooks, and make sure they are all here so that the fat, stupid white people get away with hating them. Because what are these immigrants going to do? Complain? We've made sure they are here illegally, and if they complain, they can and are deported daily. The only way you keep that machine going is to not let somebody insane like Trump tell the truth, that what you see now is the way it has been carefully crafted, mostly by Republicans, for 40 goddamn years, in a way that even Eric Blair, writing as George Orwell, never foresaw. Not the 2 minutes hate from the novel 1984, but the endless hate, the perpetual hate. You can't have Trump tell the truth that this is built into the American economy and cannot be altered unless the Republicans stop hating, or unless, like he wants, they start hating more and actually try to round up all the Hispanics and put them in concentration camps and deport some and probably kill way more, which is what Trump is going to do. Which, over the course of his decade poisoning the United States of America, he has spread to his cult, so now they have no concept, no moment's thought, that without the people, he has told them it is okay to despise and blame for everything and probably kill. America, particularly red state America, will fall apart. They don't understand this. They don't understand that because the, quote, effing Mexicans, Trump thinks it costs him too much to bury, they keep the nation running. And to think like Trump for a second, they help the productive parts of this country underwrite the money-losing states and permit them, the fat, pasty white people, to go to their beloved McDonald's, which is now just another symbol for more corporate whoring and stunt staging for fascism after that pathetic Trump immorality play over the weekend. And now these people can go to goddamned McDonald's and get a goddamned Big Mac made of crap that would cost them otherwise $37.98. Have a Happy Meal. Here's change back on your 100. But back to Hitler. If you have not read Mr. Goldberg's piece in The Atlantic, I urge you to do so. I won't further steal his thunder except, quote, 3 long passages, and to underscore one truly new and disturbing bit of information in the context of another news development unrelated to the story. Let me quote him about General Kelly. This week, I asked Kelly about their exchange. He told me that when Trump raised the subject of German generals, Kelly responded by asking, do you mean Bismarck's generals? He went on, I mean, I knew he didn't know who Bismarck was or about the Franco-Prussian War. I said, do you mean the Kaiser's generals? Surely you can't mean Hitler's generals. And he said, yeah, Hitler's generals. I explained to him that Rommel had to commit suicide after taking part in a plot against Hitler. Kelly told me Trump was not acquainted with Rommel. This wasn't the only time, Goldberg writes, Kelly felt compelled to instruct Trump on military history. In 2018, Trump asked Kelly to explain who the good guys were in World War I. Kelly responded by explaining a simple rule. Presidents should, as a matter of politics and policy, remember that the good guys in any given conflict are the countries allied with the United States. There is a sketch by the group Kids in the Hall in which an actress, played by the great Dave Foley, gets up to accept an award and thanks her manager and thanks the audience and thanks her director and thanks her agent and adds, "Oh, and thank Hitler," and waits for the applause, and instead it's her manager, played by the great Kevin McDonald, dragging her off the stage while she complains that they didn't applaud. And he says with terror in his voice, "You thanked Hitler?" And she matter-of-factly says, "Oh, I never did. No." And half the time I read something about Trump and Hitler, I am waiting for Trump's Dave Foley moment when Trump gets up there and literally thanks Hitler. And now reading all of this, I realize it's already happened. It was just in private. Let me cut now to Goldberg's conclusion because it circles back to my starting point here, and then I'll drop the new info he broke. One day, he writes, in the first year of Trump's presidency, I had lunch with Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law, in his White House office. I turned the discussion as soon as I could to the subject of his father-in-law's character. I mentioned one of Trump's recent outbursts and told Kushner that, in my opinion, the president's behavior was damaging to the country. I cited, as I tend to do, what is, in my view, Trump's original sin, his mockery of John McCain's heroism. This is where our conversation got strange and noteworthy. Kushner answered in a way that made it seem as though he agreed with me. Quote, "No one can go as low as the president," he said. "You shouldn't even try." I found this baffling for a moment, he writes, but then I understood. Kushner wasn't insulting his father-in-law. He was paying him a compliment. In Trump's mind, traditional values including those embraced by the armed forces of the United States having to do with honor, self-sacrifice, and integrity, have no merit, no relevance, and no meaning. Unquote. See? You and I are appalled by the Hitler's generals quote and the effing Mexican quote, and by next week, Trump will be selling merch or soliciting donations based on those quotes. In any event, here is the new stuff about Trump's other role models. Not the old Nazis, but the current Chinese. Quoting him again. On separate occasions in 2020, Trump held private conversations in the White House with national security officials about the George Floyd protests. Quote, "The Chinese generals would know what to do," he said, according to former officials who described the conversations to me, referring to the leaders of the People's Liberation Army, which carried out the Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989. Trump's desire to deploy U.S. troops against American citizens is well documented. During the nerve-wracking period of social unrest following Floyd's death, Trump asked Milley and Esper, a West Point graduate and former infantry officer, if the Army could shoot protesters. Trump seemed unable to think straight and calmly, Esper wrote in his memoir. The protests and violence had him so enraged that he was willing to send in active duty forces to put down the protesters. Worse yet, he suggested we shoot them. I wondered about his sense of history, of propriety, and of his oath to the Constitution, Esper told National Public Radio in 2022. We reached that point in the conversation where he looked frankly at General Milley and said, "Can't you just shoot them? Just shoot them in the legs or something?" When defense officials argued against Trump's desire, the president screamed, according to witnesses, "You are all effing losers." Now, here's why that's a problem. Because Trump and his cult are not only ready for a fight like that, they are spoiling for one, and they are spoiling for one next month. Polling by the Public Religion Research Institute and the Brookings Institution suggests that if Trump loses 2 weeks from now, just slightly less than 1 in 5 Republicans thinks he should declare the results invalid and do whatever it takes to seize power. The actual number is 19%, but among those who trust Fox News, the most of all news outlets, it's 30% who think Trump should do this. For those who trust Fox and or the even more extreme propaganda channels, it's 41%. Also, 30% of Republicans, quote, believe that true American patriots may have to resort to violence to save the country. This poll being commissioned by a religious group, after all, they broke it down by religion. 28% of evangelical Protestant Republicans think violence may be needed, as do, and this may surprise you, 28% of Mormons. Sorry, Mitt. Low end of the religious pro-violence scale is 10%, and that would be Jewish Republicans. Happily, there does seem to be a growing consensus on this front. 49% of Americans in this survey, Americans of all political parties, faiths, and heritage, agree there is a real danger Trump will use the presidency to become a dictator. Do I think the nation will erupt in organized, sustained violence after the election? I do not. Sporadic violence? Terrorism or terrorism-adjacent violence? Yes. Yes. I would prepare yourself for that. And I hate to sound anything like one of the people in that poll I just quoted, but I am comforted at night by reminding myself that Trump and the Trump cult dreams of seeing tanks on the streets. And forgive me for this, but I'm comforted by the realization that if it comes to that next month, or in December, or in January, it'll be grim, and it will be tragic, and it will be satisfying to see all the Trumpists suddenly realize that the tanks in the streets aren't theirs. The tanks in the streets are America's. Couple of poll notes as breaking news. Yesterday, I told you the Emerson poll found that around 20% of voters had chosen Harris or Trump in the last month. So late deciders were breaking 60 to 37 for the vice president, and how much that could mean in net vote gain. It could give her 25,000, 27,000 net votes. Her votes minus his votes just in Pennsylvania. Maybe 700,000 nationwide. Now, CNBC reports from its polling that young voters are also breaking late for Kamala Harris in similar numbers. Voters under 35 are now 60 to 40 for Harris over Trump. And that was not the way it was. In July, it was Harris 46, Trump 34, with 21% favoring a third-party candidate like the Secretary of Phone Sex. In other words, voters under 35 grew up. So, Harris leads Trump by 20 points in voters under 35, and in 2020, Joe Biden won by 20 points with voters under 35. If you, for some reason, like the less reliable Meta polling, YouGov for the Times of London and Reuters Ipsos have Harris by 3 in new polls. Morning Consult has Harris by 4. There's also a rash of junk polls showing Trump tied or ahead. One of them, showing him ahead in New Mexico, was literally made up by one of his crazier ex-ambassadors. She has been ahead of him by 7.5 points or more in New Mexico with virtually no change, a solid series of straight lines across the bar graph for more than a month. And a reminder from weeks ago that this was planned, because when he declares on election night that he won, or he declares afterwards that he must have been robbed, because otherwise why would these polls I'm holding have said he was winning? These junk polls, the ones that are coming out right now, will give him something to hold in his hand besides his Arnold Palmer. One more. ABC News reported last night that a, quote, proposed personnel roster circulating within Trump's campaign and transition operation lists Eileen Cannon, the federal judge who threw out Trump's classified documents case. Eileen Cannon as a possible candidate for attorney general. No, in this country. Two things. How could she possibly be worse than Merrick Garland? And how could she possibly wind up doing more for Trump than Merrick Garland? Secondly, Cannon, the former yoga and flamenco correspondent of the Miami Nuevo Herald, and I wish I were making that up, is clearly more qualified to be attorney general than she is a federal judge. The ABC says she is the second name on the list out of nearly a dozen AGs, led by Jay Clayton, former chairman of the SEC. Trump's expert on how to make illegal legal, Mike Davis, is on the list, as is Jeffrey, can I put on my pants now, Clark, who tried to freelance a coup during the transition and was then the victim of a put-down that will never die down from the Justice Department exec Richard Donahue. You're an environmental lawyer. How about you go back to your office and we'll call you when there's an oil spill? I'm not sure what to make of this story because it is literally too bad to be true. I mean, what kind of leak could cut through the noise and actually look too corrupt, too quid pro quo, even for Trump? What, against the background of his utter corruption, his Dorian Gray's portrait life, what could look worse than that? It's possible the Democrats made this up or got this out, and it's true. On the other hand, like I said, how could she ever be worse than Merrick Garland? Also of interest here, well, in news about my exes, Olivia Nuzzi had no events scheduled last night, so it'll be Katie Tur news instead. And I, of course, will continue to pretend to be weary of all this and broken inside and beyond the reach of its implications now, while in fact I'm enjoying the absolute effing hell out of all of it. That's next. This is Countdown.
This is Countdown with Keith Olbermann.
On this edition of Countdown, maybe the idea in ending the baseball playoffs on a Sunday but not starting the World Series until a Friday is to force sportscasters and even ex-sportscasters to continue to do more and more World Series previews. Well, you guys asked for it. Another World Series preview of a different nature. The New York Yankees host Game 1 Friday night, and I'm, as always, rooting against them, which is rather amazing because from the age of 7 through the start of my professional career and again in my 30s and 40s, when one friend of mine from my childhood was the PR director and another friend of mine from my early career was the team manager, I was as big a Yankee fan as there was. I worked for the Yankees once a year. George Steinbrenner wanted me to be the voice of the Yankees on TV. I used to announce their old-timers game. Like my dad before me, I was a season ticket holder at Yankee Stadium. Our combined run was 41 years. And then, to quote the man who was manager of the team when I was a kid, Ralph Houck, when I introduced myself to him in 1983 and told him he was my Yankee manager and always would be, he said, "Thank you. Nothing personal, but piss on the Yankees." The World Series preview and the day the Yankees got me fired from a job at baseball's state-run television MLB network that I hadn't even agreed to take yet. Piss on the Yankees, coming up in Things I Promised Not to Tell. First, there are still more new idiots to talk about, the daily roundup of the miscreants, morons, and Dunning-Kruger effect specimens who don't work for the Yankees and who constitute today's worst persons in the world. The bronze, worse, Jeremy Peters of the New York Times. The Yankees of newspapers, working with that little fascist midday enclave at MSNBC as well, does Mr. Peters. This was actually said on MSNBC, and I will save until the end the identity of the news model whose question provoked this amazing, condensed, compromised, partisan stupidity on the part of this guy, Peters. Question: do you think she, that would be Vice President Kamala Harris, Democratic nominee for president, if you hadn't heard, do you think she's being clear enough? Peters answers, I think in some of these interviews, you and I have both heard it, the clarity is not always her strong suit. When you contrast her with somebody with Donald Trump, who you pretty much know what he's saying every time he opens his mouth, for better or worse, she does have a messaging problem. This man Peters is employed by the New York Times, brought on to what is in theory a television news network, insisting that you pretty much know what Trump's saying every time he opens his mouth, but Kamala Harris isn't clear enough. Trump is this close to speaking in tongues. Like the other day when Trump was asked, what is your plan to ban artificial foods? And he answered, Bobby Kennedy, right? Everybody likes Bobby Kennedy, and he's so big into the healthy food and women things, everything. He wants to do things. Yes, that's clear. That's much more clear than Kamala Harris. Question, what is your plan to ban artificial foods? Answer, Bobby Kennedy is big into the healthy food and women. Yeah, I've heard that. I mean, I know Kennedy will be boosting FaceTime usage, but any idea what that has to do with banning artificial food? Mr. Kennedy, the Secretary of Phone Sex, said today. It was Mr. Peters who, after the debate, had argued that Kamala Harris had failed to give undecided voters what they really wanted. The fine print, specific policy details at length, at a debate on TV. Oh, and as promised, which MSNBC talking head hosted Peters that day and asked that question that let him lie about Trump being clear and Harris not being clear enough? Why, it's Katie Tur, who, with Kyrsten Sinema slowly disappearing from the Senate like the Cheshire Cat, and Olivia Nuzzi now being fired at New York Magazine and unlikely to ever get any job requiring, trust or honesty ever again, while she sues the creepy guy at Politico she was planning to marry and write a book with. With them out of the picture, it is Katie who has vaulted back into the position of which of my exes I am currently the most ashamed of. You can depend on Keith about women. He always gets them wrong. The runner-up, worser, Newsweek magazine. Years ago, my late friend Howard Feynman left his lead role at Newsweek to go work for the Huffington Post, which then, and I guess now too, but then certainly sounded like a website for people who like to inhale paint. And it was the first time I realized that all the established news brands of my youth were in desperate trouble long term. I mean, Newsweek wasn't the first to succumb. My first home, UPI, even by then, 2006, 7, 8, was putting out other people's press releases, and like only one or two a week. Sports Illustrated is a betting site. Others are just expiring URLs. But if there was any doubt Newsweek is done, this was its post at midday Monday. A photo of Trump at a sports stadium, presumably one in Pittsburgh, somewhere with the caption, Donald Trump has shared what is likely an AI-generated image on his Truth Social account showing him as a player for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Wait, what makes you think that? Just because the image showed Trump in football pads wearing a Steelers uniform, weighing maybe 100 pounds less than he does, about 40 years younger than he is, and not looking like he was about to succumb to a disease or something? Didn't Donald Trump play quarterback for the Steelers in the late 60s? Oh, no, I'm thinking of the other guy who reminds me always of Donald Trump's name. His name was Dick Shiner. Think I'm kidding? Dick Shiner, S-H-I-N-E-R. Look him up. Also played for the New York Giants for a while. Giants get Dick Shiner was the headline. Anyway, so 9 hours after posting this idea that maybe that image of Trump wearing the 47 on a Steelers uniform, maybe that was AI, 9 hours later, one of the 3 or 4 people at Newsweek finally saw the social media blowback to their incredibly stupid post, and they changed the article. So as of Monday night, the headline on the story itself, but not the tweet, had been changed to, quote, Trump posts fake image of himself as a star NFL player. You think? Whoa, way to go out on a limb there, Newsweek. On the other hand, if the New York Times and Jeremy Peters had done the story, it would have been, Trump shows his athletic side in creative post. But our winner, the worst, same topic, same football team, and the Trump campaign. It is a little over a week since the Trump candidate for the Senate in Pennsylvania, David McCormick, had his own problem with the Pittsburgh Steelers. He posted what read like, whether or not he was really too dumb to tell the difference between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Philadelphia Eagles. Whether or not he's really that stupid is unclear, but it reads like he's that stupid. Quoting it, pictures of him, 4 different pictures of him in Eagles green with Eagles fans outside the Eagles Stadium. Fun tailgate in Philly today, football emoji. Excited to watch the Steelers throttle the Raiders. Republican Senate candidate in Pennsylvania. Why the Steelers should prove so troubling for Republicans or Newsweek or anybody else is hard to say. They have been in the National Football League since the Rooney family got a franchise in 1933 and named it the Pittsburgh Football Pirates. Then in 1940, they said enough of this confusion and they paid tribute to the city's steel industry by renaming the team the Steelers, named for steel with 2 E's, and then an R and an S added at the end there. Steelers. Steelers. They're the 6th oldest franchise in the NFL. They're a pretty big effing deal. The Trump campaign does not know how to spell the team name. It has sent out one of its 44 million daily fundraising emails focusing on Trump's most important campaign finish line statements, his stunt not actually working serving French fries to people who weren't really customers and weren't really surprised to see him there at a fascist McDonald's that wasn't really open, and the other one was going to a Pittsburgh Steelers game. I quote the fundraising email in full, Trump Vance 2024, the little button in the corner that says shop. Can't stop, won't stop. Working at McDonald's, a town hall, a Steelers game. No one is working harder than President Trump to... I'm not paying a lot for this funeral. A Steelers game, it reads. S-T-E-A-L-E-R-S. Why, that has the word steal in it. S-T-E-A-L, as in thief, as in Trump. Donald Trump of the Steelers, S-T-E-A-L-E-R-S, Steelers. Sometimes the jokes just write themselves. Today's worst person in the world! Annually, at this time of year, somebody asks me, why aren't you at that all baseball network? Seems like you'd be a natural. And I say, you mean MLB network? And they say, yeah. And I say, sit down. You got to hear this story. The owners of at least 5 different Major League Baseball teams have tried to get me fired over the years, and one, the New York Yankees, kind of succeeded. On November 26, 2012, my agent followed the instructions of Tony Petitti, then the president of the TV publicity channel owned by Major League Baseball, MLB Network, and called Petitti to finalize a deal by which I would join the channel to do a daily show, probably at 5:30 at night. It was going to be weird. MLB Network and its sister hockey channel, NHL Network, originate in the same studios in Secaucus, New Jersey, that MSNBC used every day from the day I started there in October 1997 through the day in October 2007 when NBC finally moved us to New York City. I had been asked to do something for MLB Network in 2008 and 2009 before it ever got on the air. The request came directly from the then Commissioner of Baseball, Bud Selig. He also asked me to write for baseball's website, MLB.com. We actually got that done, but the TV show was impossible because of my schedule until I was a free agent in the fall of 2012. So I was invited in the fall of 2012 to do a couple of guest appearances at MLB Network, and they went well, except for this crazy deja vu kind of thing that hit me when I went into the building and found that while baseball had spent $60 million to upgrade all the technical stuff and the studio designs, they had not touched anything else from the MSNBC era. The carpet tiles were the same. The ping pong table in the break room was the same. The signs on the back of the bathroom door telling you who to call if the John overflows were the same. It was like having a dream where you're back in your childhood home and everything is exactly the way it was, including the creaks in the floorboards, except, oh, by the way, there's a nuclear reactor in the middle of your den, and you keep saying, where did that come from? Anyway, The guest appearances on MLB Network went well, and this guy, Petiti, the president, asked if I would fill in for 2 days on their new morning show the week of Thanksgiving 2012. I certainly knew how to get to the building. I did the shows with Brian Kenny and Ken Rosenthal and Bob Costas' son Keith and Alana Rizzo, and we had a good time. And Tony Petiti, the president of MLB Network, attended the meetings that we would have before and after each show. I mean, full staff meetings, 15 or so people standing around a bunch of cubicles. And in front of all of them, Tony Petiti began asking me if I thought my new show for MLB Network would do better at 5 or 5:30. And if I agreed with him that I should work only during the baseball season and spring training and playoffs and winter meetings and then stay fresh by taking the rest of the year off. He asked me if there were people on the staff of the morning show who I would like to work with. I mean, this is in front of all of the staff of the morning show. He warned me they couldn't pay me the kind of salary I was used to, and I said that happily the kind of salary I was used to meant I did not need the kind of salary I was used to. He told me to remind my agent to call him the Monday after Thanksgiving. He wished me a happy turkey, and everybody left, and everybody heard his plans, and a couple of the producers asked me if I was recommending them to be on my new show on MLB Network. So how come I don't have a new show on MLB Network? Or how come we're not celebrating the 10th anniversary of my new show on MLB Network? Well, on Monday afternoon, my agent calls me and says he's just gotten off the phone with Tony Petiti, and it was the strangest conversation he had had since he became an agent. No, let me rephrase that, he said, because it wasn't a conversation. It was an attempted conversation. I kept asking him what he told me to call him about, and he would then say, nothing. Initially, I did not understand. What do you mean he said nothing? My agent said he meant literally that. I say, so Tony, what's your offer to Keith? And then there was silence. And I thought the phone call had dropped out. So I said, Tony, are you there? And he say, sure am. So again, I ask him, what's your offer to Keith? And again, literally, silence. Only this time I can hear him breathing. I tried like 10 different ways. Are we talking about Keith now? Silence. Is there a reason you're being silent about Keith, Tony? Silence. If I changed the subject, talked about somebody else, he was his normal self. If I mentioned your name, he went silent. The next day, the agent calls me back. Petiti just did this again with me on the phone. He wouldn't speak, literally wouldn't say any words in any language if I mentioned your name. Took me a long time to find out what had actually happened. The next baseball season, after I'd gone back to work at ESPN, I'm at a game. There's one of the MLB Network officials whom I'd met on my 2 days before Thanksgiving 2012, and this person comes up to me and apologizes. We all heard what happened. It's so embarrassing. Petiti is such a coward. The Yankees got to him. And another club. I never found out which one. There was some kind of conference call a Monday after Thanksgiving to tell the teams about your new show, and whoever was on the call for the Yankees went ballistic. So they said something like, if you put him on MLB Network, we will disable your cameras at Yankee Stadium and never let any of you inside the building again. Instantly, I knew why the Yankees would have done that. I was, and my father before me, a season ticket holder for 42 years for Yankee games. And for 10 of those years, I was also one of the two announcers who did a kind of play-by-play over the public address system at Yankee Stadium on Old Timers Day. And then one day in 2011, I tweeted a photo of a Yankee employee in the stands giving some sort of hand signals to Alex Rodriguez in the on-deck circle. The guy was clearly telling Alex Rodriguez what the last pitch had been. It wasn't cheating. It was helping a supposed superstar who apparently could not figure out for himself from on the field what the last pitch had been. I tweeted the photo. Major League Baseball called the Yankees and told them to cut it out. The Yankees and A-Rod looked stupid in the newspapers. And the Yankees management said they were not mad at me. And then 3 months later, days before Old Timers Day, they leaked to the papers that I had been fired as Old Timers Day play-by-play man because I had tweeted that photo of Alex Rodriguez and the guy in the stands. So, rather naturally, my response was to not renew my season tickets, and my tickets were right behind home plate, and they cost like $400,000 a year. And relax, I gave about 70% of them to Make-A-Wish. But the Yankees, being the Yankees, were furious that I would not give them $400,000 a year anyway. So they told MLB Network if MLB Network gave me a show, they would unplug MLB Network's cameras. Actually, they did more than that. I asked my friend, the MLB Network official, the real puzzler of the saga, why this MLB Network president, Tony Petitti, literally would not speak, would not say anything, not even deals off to my agent. Oh, the official said, the Yankees were specific about that. If you say anything to him or his people, we will get you fired. So Petitti took it literally. He said if you called or your agent called to just give you the silent treatment. These are adults, mind you. And they say that on-air talent are the prima donnas. As I said, the Yankees are the closest of 5 different teams who tried to have actually gotten me fired, sort of. When I was in local news in Los Angeles, Jackie Autry, the woman who went from being Gene Autry's banker to being his second wife, tried to get me fired from my station in L.A. because I had criticized their team, the California Angels. She tried again a few years later after I got to ESPN. Then there were the Tampa Bay Rays, well, the Devil Rays at that point, whose first owner, Vince Naimoli, was convinced I had a vendetta against his team and was making up stories about them that were accidentally true. He could not conceive that somebody in his organization who he paid actually hated him so much that this person called me up and volunteered to feed me anything bad that went on there. But that is exactly what happened. So that's the Yankees, the Angels, and the Rays. And there's a mystery 5th team that was also involved in the MLB Network thing. And then there were the Chicago White Sox. One of their co-owners, Eddie Einhorn, was a big fan of mine, but for 44 years. The team has been run by the other co-owner, Jerry Reinsdorf. And Jerry Reinsdorf was one of the key figures in the strike that killed the 1994 baseball season. During that terrible winter that followed, my sources in the Baseball Players Association showed me a copy of their offer to the owners. The owners were led by Reinsdorf. And in the players' offer, they were willing to actually negotiate one of the players' union's sacred cows, salary arbitration. They were willing to cut it or maybe eliminate it outright. But after complaining about salary arbitration for 20 years, the owners' committee, led by this Reinsdorf idiot, turned the players down. Apparently, most of the owners did not know that Reinsdorf had passed on a chance to eliminate salary arbitration, a kind of automatic inflation thing within baseball contracts. And they came down on Reinsdorf like a ton of bricks. What do you mean you turned down the chance to stop salary arbitration? So naturally, he blamed me. And he called up ESPN and he demanded they fire me, which to their credit, they never did do. Revenge is a dish which people of taste prefer to eat cold, goes the old Italian proverb. Reinsdorf is today despised within baseball. He has once again ruined the Chicago White Sox. The Tampa Bay Rays owner, Naimoli, sold the team, unknowingly obviously, to a man named Stuart Sternberg, who turned out to be married to a friend of mine from college, so whenever the Rays would come into New York, I would sit with Stu and his wife Lisa in their box. Their eldest son interned for me. MLB Network, which started out pretty good, is now just a propaganda machine in which every team is unbeaten and every player is the greatest ever, and they fired their best reporter, Ken Rosenthal, because he dared to write something critical of the idiot Commissioner Robert Manfred. So, go Dodgers. I mean, you know, my late friend and hero Vin Scully. Dodgers, Dodgers, Dodgers. Done all the damage I can do here. Thank you for listening. We're now back to 5 episodes a week, posting nightly just after midnight Eastern, 9 Pacific. Follow me for the podcast promo videos on TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, X, Instagram, and InstaU. Once again, there is a Monday countdown. Please send this podcast or tell somebody about it. Send it to them. Somebody who does not know they need to listen to this podcast but should. It's called Countdown. We've discussed how my late hero and friend Mr. Scully told me he was offered the Yankees announcing job in 1964, offered the chance to go home again to the metropolitan New York area, and again in 1967. He said, "No thanks, I'll stay here. Thank you very much." I mentioned that once on the air, and Southern California erupted. "Oh, we almost lost Ben 50 years ago." Brian Ray and John Philip Chanel, the musical directors of Countdown, arranged, produced, and performed most of our music. Mr. Chanel handled orchestration and keyboards. Mr. Ray was on the guitars, bass, and drums. It was produced by TKO Brothers. Our satirical and pithy musical comments are by the best baseball stadium organist ever, Nancy Faust. Sports music is the Olbermann theme from ESPN2, written by Mitch Warren Davis, courtesy of ESPN Inc. Other music arranged and performed by the group No Horns Allowed. My announcer today was my friend John Dean, Dodgers fan. Everything else was pretty much my fault. It's Countdown for today, 1 week and 6 days until the 2024 presidential election, the 1,387th day since convicted felon dissociative fugue J. Trump's first attempted coup against the democratically elected government of the United States. Use the election, use the mental health system, use presidential immunity to keep him from doing it again while we still have a chance. The next scheduled countdown is tomorrow. Bulletins as the news requires. Until the next one, I'm Keith Olbermann. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, and good luck.